Imagine you're in the middle of a job interview, a first date, or on a crowded bus, and your body has completely let you down. Imagine shouting involuntarily, swearing, not out of anger or carelessness, but simply because your brain works differently. Now, imagine this happening every single day for your entire life in full view of the whole world and under their judgmental stares. This is where the film, I swear, begins, and it's an incredible story. If you're new here, hit subscribe and join us at Reviews of Films, where we dig into the movies that actually have something to say. Robert Aramayo plays John, and from the very first scenes, you get a sense of who this kid is before the syndrome takes hold. He's social, full of life, decent at football, the kind of boy with an easy grin and a future that looks open. But underneath that surface, his home life is churning. An unstable, emotionally chaotic household plants the seeds, and under enough stress, the first ticks begin to appear. A twitch here, a sound there, initially dismissed as something passing, something temporary. They are not. For anyone unfamiliar, Tourette syndrome involves involuntary movements and vocalizations, eye blinking, shoulder jerking, sudden sounds, and in some cases, uncontrollable outbursts, including profanity. The film doesn't sensationalize any of this. Instead, it places you right inside the experience, scene by scene, watching a young man desperately try to contain something that cannot be contained. And that's where the film becomes genuinely painful to watch. Not because it's melodramatic, it isn't, but because what happens to John feels achingly real and completely avoidable. On a football pitch, in a movie theater, on a date, in classrooms and hallways, John is repeatedly misread. The people around him see aggression, provocation, or instability where there's only neurology. He gets pushed out, mocked, avoided, and the cruelest part is that John knows exactly how he's being perceived, which piles shame and social anxiety onto everything else he's already carrying. He begins to disappear, right? That's not physically, but in every way that matters. He retreats inward, and the world, mostly relieved, lets him go. The film is sharp in how it handles his parents. His mother loves him. That's never really in question. But love without understanding, without the right tools, isn't enough. It doesn't stop the damage. His father is distant and authoritarian in a way that only compounds the pressure. The household that should be John's refuge becomes another place where he shrinks. This dynamic is handled with real restraint. There's no villain here, just the quiet devastation of people who don't know what they don't know. Then Dottie arrives, played by Shirley Henderson, and the film shifts on its axis. What makes Dottie so affecting is how uncomplicated her approach to John actually is. She doesn't treat him as a project, or a burden, or a puzzle to be solved. She just treats him like a person. She talks to him the way you'd talk to anyone. And for John, that simple act lands like something seismic. The film frames her not as a savior, but as a mirror. Someone who reflects back to John, a version of himself he had completely stopped believing in. It's a beautifully quiet kind of character work, and Henderson brings all of it home. Not long after, through Dottie, John finds himself working as a janitor at a community center alongside Tommy, played by Peter Mullen. Tommy has that warm, no-nonsense energy of someone who's seen enough of life to know that strange doesn't mean bad. He talks straight with John, gives him room to exist without flinching, and slowly, without fanfare or inspirational speeches, starts pulling John's confidence back up from wherever it had buried itself. There's even a thread of dry, understated humor between the two of them that the film uses wisely. In a story this emotionally heavy, those moments of levity don't feel like relief valves, they feel earned. Aramayo's performance throughout all of this deserves real recognition. What he's doing physically is demanding, not just mimicking tics, but locating the internal state that produces them. The exhaustion, the frustration, the resignation, the occasional dark humor of someone who has had to make peace with something most people will never understand. He walks a line between the condition's external expression and the man behind it, and he doesn't let one swallow the other. As John begins to stabilize, the film's ideas come into sharper focus. I swear it isn't really about Tourette syndrome as a medical condition. It's using Tourette syndrome to talk about something bigger, about how society defines normal, how it treats anything that falls outside that definition, and how much damage gets done in the gap between ignorance and curiosity. The film argues quietly but persistently that the tics were never the problem. The problem was always in other people's heads. There's a turn in the final stretch where John stops trying to suppress who he is and starts channeling it, letting the very thing that isolated him become something that connects him to others going through similar experiences. His involuntary sounds become something closer to a signal, a way of being visible on his own terms. It's the kind of character arc that could easily tip into sentimentality, but the film keeps its feet on the ground. It doesn't pretend the struggle disappears. It just suggests that there's a version of life on the other side of shame that's actually worth living. If there's a criticism to be made, it's that the film occasionally presses its themes with a slightly heavy hand. Some of the messaging lands with the kind of clarity that edges toward the didactics. You fill the screenplay making sure you've understood the point. For viewers who prefer their ideas embedded in subtext, there are moments where I swear states its case a little more plainly than it needs to. But honestly, given the subject matter and the real-world audience this story could reach, people who live with this syndrome or love someone who does, that directness feels less like a flaw and more like a deliberate choice. What lingers after I swear is something that good biographical films rarely manage to hold on to. The sense that the person on screen was real, is real, and that what happened to them matters beyond the movie itself. John Davidson's story is singular, but the dynamics at its core, misunderstanding, isolation, the transformative weight of being genuinely seen by even one other person, are anything but. That's what makes this film land the way it does. It's not asking you to admire John Davidson from a distance, it's asking whether you'd have been Dottie or whether you'd have been everyone else.